So Pang, when I'm talking, if I'm freezing up and stuff, will you just let me know and I'll turn my camera off and maybe the audio will still work?
Sure.
Okay.
Yay. Love it. I know, it's like figuring all this out.
Oh, Araceli's here.
Yes. Hold on, I've hid everybody.
Well, it's nice seeing people's names that I recognize.
I know, it's super fun. So we're on, and we are now recording and everything. Joe, long time no see. Abby, long time no see. And then it's weird because like Pong, you're like there, but you're not there. So I've got you twice. Yay, Araceli. Who else do we have? And Nelson. Yay, I forgot. And then Brian, you got the link. Okay, awesome. Nelson, mi amigo, ¿qué tal? Yay. How's it going? Or same old, same old. Here, hold on, I'll pause. Awesome. I'm going to give everybody just a few more seconds here just to be sure. And then Jenna, yeah, we'll let you know if you go, if your video goes rogue. You know, it's like, ugh. I was like at school today, the students kept saying in the chat, sometimes I think they're lying and I think they're like, oh, you're frozen. But like, no, I'm not. And they just like, right, like my internet. And you're like, really? But I was 100% frozen today because even the kids that would never they're like, they're just like ting hanging on every word. There's two of them. So it's not nearly anybody, but the two of them were like, wow, there seem to be some issues. I'm like, okay. When Ariel says there are issues, there are issues. I must actually be freezing. So I understand. Yay. Well, welcome everybody. Cool. We've got all the things happening. It's Tuesday once again. So here we are, right? Webinaring. Super great to see some of the same people, which is great. Repeat attenders. This is just what we do. We just hang out a couple times a week now. My name is Meredith White and I teach just outside of Atlanta, Georgia, Spanish 1 and 2. And this is, let's see. Oh man, I'd been counting the weeks and now I lost count. Oh, shoot, 28, I think 28 out of 40 webinars that we have going on this spring. And so hopefully you guys, we're going to share Pong and Jenna are both going to share. We've got the link to the slides and everything. So we're hoping that you get information, but also this is just a space to connect and collaborate and chat. So we are excited for that connection. So thanks for coming to Georgia, even though here we are on the computer, as always. In the chat, like I said, I'm outside of Atlanta, Georgia. So in the chat, it would be awesome to hear where you guys are from. I'm going to throw it to Pong while you're saying what you teach, where you find yourself, or supervise, wherever it is that you find yourself these days, doing all the things. So Joe, thank you for starting that. I super appreciate it. It's been really fun season, right? Spring is a season. It's been fun all season seeing people like, wait, you're in Chicago? I'm in Chicago. So really fun connection. So kind of our own little world here, like in Georgia, but I literally see 3 people from Georgia. Everybody else is everywhere else. So really, really fun. So I'm excited to throw it over, and we've got a really apt topic tonight, which I was thinking about quite a bit today, just with things going on and looking forward to tonight anyway, but in a more somber way for sure, talking about mental health in a heritage classroom. So I'm anxious to learn more about, well, hopefully, I know it's not your topic, but hopefully hearing about your Hmong efforts as well, just a little bit. And then, or maybe a lot, because maybe they tie into your topic. So I'm excited, but I would love to hear more about that. And then obviously we'll get right into it. And I'm going to reshare the slides in the chat, and Pong, I'm going to throw it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Meredith. Welcome, everyone. Yajong. My name is Bang Young, and I am a former ESL teacher and a current Hmong language heritage teacher in Osceola School District, and we are located in Brooklyn Park, Minnesota. My physical school last year is just a few miles away from the Dante shooting that happened on Sunday night. And so we're close to home with that. I am currently, along with my Hmong heritage language work that I do during my daytime job. I also do partnership with Dr. Jenna Cushing-Leubner with a grant. And as a result of that, we do have a nonprofit that came out of that project, Minnesota Jeju. And that is to continue the Hmong heritage reclamation work that we've started for the last 3 years, and also to provide some services to our Hmong families in Brooklyn Center, Brooklyn Park area. All right, we'll turn it over to Jenna.
Hi, everyone. Remember to wave at me if I'm cracking up. So my name is Jenna Cushing-Leubner. I'm so excited to be here, and thank you for the invitation. I am an assistant professor of language teacher education at University of Wisconsin-Whitewater, so that's in southern Wisconsin. But I split my time working with heritage language educators in Minnesota and Wisconsin primarily, although the work also spans across the whole country and sometimes outside of the country too. And the Hmong work that I've been a part of with Bang for the last few years also brings together some really amazing powerhouse heritage language Hmong teachers from California as well. And so I work in language teacher preparation for ESL and bilingual teachers and also world language teachers. And my main primary work for the last 12 years that started with a dear friend and colleague of mine, Jay Ike Diggs, who's at the University of Arizona right now, is in heritage language education, specifically critical heritage language education and professional development for teachers who are oftentimes curriculum creators, writing their own texts, and working very closely with families, elders, artists, and community educators to create ethnic studies and culturally sustaining pedagogies in our heritage language context. So I actually run the heritage language education professional development program that all of that work has come together to create at UW-Whitewater as well, which is really exciting. Thanks for having me.
So you guys are not busy at all.
No, we're on basic vacation all the time.
No. Calendar's wide open.
Yes, it is. It's been a very busy but amazing journey so far the last 3 years. I want to give you a little bit of his context to where Osseo District Park Center was my home for the last so many years. And this coming school year, I am going to be teaching in our online school that is starting brand new in our district. So we've started in 2016, the Heritage Spanish courses started at Park Center. And then the year after we added Hmong. And then we are working on our way with Heritage Vietnamese classes. And so our programs have, grown in the last 4 years. In particular, a Hmong program, we have over about 300 students at 2 sites. So we went from 1 FTE to 1.8 and next year 2.0. So our students are, very much interested and invested in learning their home language. So today I'm speaking to you from experience. I'm not a clinician, but I'm sharing my experience with you as a practitioner in the classroom. Mental health has never been so important since COVID kicked in, since everything in America has turned upside down in the last year. Mental health has never been so important in our classrooms, with our students, with us. And so when I was teaching, when I was an ESL teacher many years ago, I had long-term Hmong English learners in my classroom. And we often thought, why in the world are Hmong students born in America are still in the English language learner program? And they've been there for 9-10 years and they can't exit the program. So I started, when I got to the high school, I started kind of trying to figure out what is it that is causing our Hmong students to stay, to plateau with their academic in English and to not achieve their academic in order to exit the program, right? So I looked at my Hmong long-term English learners and I noticed low self-esteem. I noticed their confidence. They lacked confidence. Their identity. They had an identity crisis. They didn't know who they were. And so I started noticing these making these observations. And then when I had the opportunity to actually start teaching, going from 15 to 20 students with my English learners, and now teaching 36 students per class. With 5 classes, I went to a huge class size. And now, as I went for my first year of my Hmong classes, I started noticing my Hmong students. In Hmong, there's a word called Zhong. And when my Hmong students came in, I would start noticing, like the first couple weeks, I would be able to look at a student and say, something's not right with the student. The Zhong is like a sadness you see in their facial expression. I wonder what's going on. And so I often talk to my students about, the importance of being physically in school, but also mentally doing well and mentally being in school and learning the content. And if you're not mentally healthy, it's going to prevent you from learning the content that Miss Yang's going to teach you. So as the school year went on, that first year, I noticed some of my students, I'm like, what are you doing? Why are you wearing like a sweater in 90-degree temperature? I don't get it every single day. And one day I got to know these students really well. And one day one of my students showed me her wrist, and it was the marks from cutting in middle school. And so as these incidents are happening, I'm trying to figure out why are students cutting themselves? And I've learned that it starts as young as the intermediate grades in elementary school to the middle school. So I started to get really concerned. I saw students come into my classroom, disengaged, withdrawn from school, giving up hope for their future, and for some, dropping out. And so when we disaggregated the data with our school, we're looking at the Asian students who dropped out of high school. It was our Hmong boys that dropped out the most in terms of our Asian dropout rate. And so I started thinking, why is it that our Hmong boys drop out at a higher rate than our Hmong girls? And I started to talk to a lot of Hmong boys. I started asking what they were doing at home and how things are going at home. And then I'm realizing that they're playing a lot of excessive video games for some students. Some students are able to play games for a couple of hours and get away with, do their homework, do academically well, while others play excessively hours and hours after school or on weekends. And I started to think, what is going on? And so I'm thinking, well, I noticed all these observations because of how I was setting up my classroom. I was setting a safe space for my students to tell me their narratives, their circles, creating safe spaces and allowing them to be vulnerable. But in order for that to happen, I had to be vulnerable. I had to share my story. I had to share all the obstacles that I went through in life, not in details, but enough so they know that, you know what, my teacher's been there and done that. She understands me. And by doing that, students are able to share their story and are able to start healing. And then I also embed writing assignments in my classroom. So one of the assignment I embedded was Dear My Teacher. And Dear My Teacher, and if you have the Google slide, there's a link directly to my publisher, Hmong Educational Resource Publisher. And what that assignment did was that I asked them to tell me, what is it that I need to know about you so that I can help you be successful? And so they did that assignment, and every year sets of students will write it, and then I ended up publishing my second year's assignment in that book. And I thought in my mind, I'm like, why is it that it's come into, why is it that I see all of these things in my classroom? And I thought about one, the high expectations that Hmong parents or Asian parents have of their kids. They want their kids to be doctors and lawyers and all these high expectation, all these careers. But what they don't realize is, you know, is my child capable, and am I doing what I need to support them? So students often have a hard time with that expectation. How do I meet my parents' high expectation of doing well and making them happy? But at the end, I'm not happy with my life. So that expectation also play a role into why I saw what I saw. And another thing was that the video games. I remember back in the 80s and 90s, there were a lot of Hmong gangs. And those Hmong gangs disappeared because the youths grown up, gotten married, settled. And so I know that during that time, there was a lot of racial tension as well. So those gangs were set up because of that. But then later on, young folks, the parents now have young folks in their home, and video games came along. So if parents are out in the community, out and about, volunteering in the community, well, I don't want my son to be out and about and causing trouble. So why not buy video games for them? Keep them at home, keep them occupied. But what they didn't know was setting limitations. What parents didn't know was setting limitations and making sure that, video game was only, had limits to it, right? Parents didn't know that. And there are some really tough consequences as a result of that. I've seen students drop out because when they play a lot of video games, that's where they have so much stress, and they just say, you know what, I don't want to deal with this. Playing video game helps me stay unstressed, helps me de-stress. And so that was also another reason. A third reason is my students often tell me, well, we've been whitewashed by the educational system. We don't see ourselves reflected in the classroom, in the curriculum. We're told to speak English only. We don't see ourselves reflected in the classroom. And then another reason could be Hmong students, Asian students are often very silent in the classroom. They don't make noises, get in trouble. And so sometimes, because they're so quiet, they're often left in the dark when actually they are suffering. And so as I continue to piece everything together my first year of teaching Hmong students, I continue to learn more about mental health in the Hmong community. Mental health means crazy. And so there's a huge stigma in the Hmong community in regards to mental health. So I'm going to pass this back to Jenna, and I want to ask you, what have your experiences been with other heritage language teacher and mental health?
Thank you, Pang. Thank you for sharing all of that. Yeah, I mean, I think this, although we're talking today about the context of Hmong youth and Hmong heritage language education. I mean, this is something that is definitely not unique, and we can see this across every single one of our heritage language reclamation contexts. And a couple of things that I want us to think about is connected to two pieces here. One of them is this idea of self-medicating, right? So Bang has shared examples of self-medicating. Self-medicating when we're talking about emotional traumas that can often be historical and intergenerational. They can be racialized traumas. They can be gender-based violence connected traumas. And these, forms of self-harm are a form of self-medicating, right? And we often see this in gendered ways where young girls and young women will use cutting as self-harm. And that is a form of self-medicating because of the endorphin release, which is a form of medicating against the kind of the internal impacts of this. And video games, right? This example of video games in the Hmong community, especially with young men, is a form of medicating. Any form of detachment is a form of mental, emotional, and spiritual self-medication. And I think about as adults, many of us are probably familiar in the last year, especially with doom scrolling, right? We lose hours and hours of our life scrolling. And if you replace that with TikTok, hours and hours of our lives replaced by this form of self-medication for mental, emotional, spiritual detachment and disconnection from what are really toxic stressors in our environments. And toxic stressors, the difference between regular stress and toxic stress is regular stress, our bodies have a response, a physiological response to that deals with that stress and processes that stress. It's what's called acute stress, right? Toxic stress is stress that continues to come and pile up and accumulate, and our physiological responses can't deal with it as well, and can't shuffle it out. And so we turn to forms of oftentimes detachment. This is where we get this idea of fight, flight, or freeze. And my therapist actually said to me a few months ago, or fall, and she said, fall asleep. So some of us actually get tired when we're stressed out. When we see our students yawning in class, it might be because they're taking care of siblings. They have a job, they're working late at night, but they might also be falling asleep, yawning, because they are at such a high level of toxic stress in their lives. And so this idea of self-medicating, becoming maladaptive, where we find something that seems to medicate us, but then that begins to take over, and we can't control it anymore, and it's controlling us and doing us a different form of harm. And I want us to think really hard about how self-medicating versus healing, how those are two really distinct things, and healing is something that we really see as central to our heritage language education environments. And we can see this in Spanish, our most commonly taught heritage language. We have learned so much about this from indigenous language revitalization and ancestral knowledge reclamation amongst indigenous language revitalization programs, which is another form of heritage language education. And in these programs, there's studies that are really incredible that have shown communities with high levels of youth suicide ideation, attempts, and completions. And when language revitalization programming was put into place in those communities with community member, family educator, elder educators educating in the language, doing reclamation of the language, reclamation of cultural understandings. Pang mentioned this identity crisis in our youth. That in those spaces, after the implementations of those programs, where youth are really held closely and experience intergenerational healing, they found not only a reduction, but almost a complete absence of suicide attempts and completions, and a massive reduction to almost, to below 5% of suicide ideation, like self-reporting of suicide ideation amongst young people. The power of our heritage language spaces is really incredible. And this is something in Spanish, and especially in Mexican American studies, ethnic studies, Latinx Chicanic studies, that world of powerful culturally sustaining pedagogies. There's people will sometimes say la cultura cura, right? And this means like the language is the cure, the language is the healing. This reclaiming of language, knowledge systems, cultural practices, who we are through collective memory and healing, does that healing work, right? And one thing I want, before we move on, for us to each think of us as educators working in these school systems, is that if we have a need for medication, right? Think about when we have a cold or the flu, right? If we have a need for medication, whether we self-medicate with sleep or tea and honey or whatever, or over-the-counter medicine, or we're given something from a doctor, that medication, that need for healing doesn't come from nowhere. It's a response to an illness, or a response to needing to clean our systems of a toxin, some sort of poison in our system, right? And if our young people are expressing this need for self-medication, this cry for healing, collective healing, we have to, before we do this intervention, we have to ask ourselves, what is doing the toxic harm? What is the poison source? What is the toxin source? And so often for our kids, you know, multilingual children of color with personal and familial immigration experiences, migration experiences, or refugee experiences, you know, that is a complex answer, and schools are not innocent, right? So the racialized trauma, the separation of people from their identities, their cultural practices, their senses of self, their confidence, and their connection to their language, their ability, you know, to not be separated from their families, right? Schools play a part in that, our English only school systems, but that also means that our heritage language environments can be part of that healing, that collective healing space. And we can do this in ways together that can really support our young people to be healers with each other.
Wow. This is why I need Jenna. I have all these things happen in my classroom, but I don't even know if I'm doing what I should be doing, or if I'm on the right track. And Jenna always confirms with research, with her knowledge. So that's why I love Jenna so much.
It's easy to confirm you, Punk.
And so, you know, after the first year, I was like, yeah, I'm gonna do lots of work with mental health. Next year, I'm gonna really focus on it, because I finally got a understanding of mental health. And then we go on summer break. And one day I was at the hospital with my son, who had just had cleft lip and palate surgery. And I'm scrolling through social media, and I get through to a post, and that one of my students, he took his own life. He took his own life. And I was in the hospital. I'm like, no, this can't be real. This can't be. All through my first year, I'm like, oh, I'm going to make this a priority next year. And so I'll have a little bit of time to learn. And it hit. I completely shut down for a week. I was so upset at myself. I said, why didn't I see this? Why couldn't I do more? Well, I didn't know the extent of his mental health. And so I decided, I'm like, nope, I've had enough. I'm tired. 2019 was the year where we lost at least 6 Hmong youths in Minnesota to suicide. I've never heard, in my 40 years living in Minnesota, I've never heard that extensive. And so I was just torn apart. And I said to the Hmong artists who I knew, I'm like, we got to do something. And I had bumped into a couple of Hmong professional psychologists and had been connecting them on Facebook. I'm like, we got to do something about it. We can't just do nothing. And so I called them. We met. And out of that, we created a project called Project Chandu, Project Sunshine. And the goal of the movement is to destigmatize mental health and suicide prevention. And so that was the journey to why we have this urgency in the Hmong community to talk about mental health, because it's been swept under the rug for too many years. And I was just not going to take another student's suicide or another, youth suicide to do something about it. I said, you know what? We have to start destigmatizing. We have to start working together. So I'm going to throw this back to Jenna and ask her to, why is change and collaboration so important with the community in terms of mental health in our classroom? So why is it so important that we work with the community?
Yeah. I love this question, because I really think, I think at this point, we all know so much is put on the shoulders of teachers, right? Teachers are asked to do all things for all people in so many ways. You have to be an expert in what you're teaching about. You have to be a pedagogical expert who can keep up with the constant changes in our knowledge base about, how to teach well. What does it mean to be a good teacher? And you also have to be, as a language teacher, you have to like have all the language, right? You have to know how to do all the things in all the different varieties or dialects of a language. You have to know like the deep, deep, deep layers of culture and you also have to understand how to function within them to be culturally responsive and culturally sustaining. And you also have to tackle all of the social inequities and racial injustices in our really, really problematic, historically problematic country, right? All those things you get, 4 or 5 years to prep for that, and then you're licensed and go for it, right? Also, you probably have to create curriculum and write texts and learn how to do assessment, and you have to do all these things, right? So, what I love about this question, Bang, is it takes that off of the shoulders of educators. Teachers are amazing people. We are not, and you are not superhuman, and you're only one. This idea that a singular person should be able to put on a cape and do all the things and see everybody and solve everything and be the medicine and every single thing, that is, and this might make some people upset, but that's a real, like, what we call late capitalist problem. So this idea that like you are only valuable if you can solve all the issues. What that does is it really, really marginalizes our capacities to be a part of what is actually a collective project. Harm is done interpersonally, but harm is also done collectively, right? Our systems create harm. Our social and racialized injustices create harm. Our histories with intergenerational trauma, harmful. Our school projects of English, like language and cultural elimination, replacement with English, harm. Those are collective harms that are experienced and put on groups of people, and they are collective projects for healing. As an educator, why on earth should you know how to teach, like be the perfect culturally sustaining pedagogue for every single child in your classroom, every single year of what is hopefully a long life in the profession, right? Collaborating with each other, working together with those who love and raise up the children in your classrooms best, right? Those are our primary co-teachers. The very first teacher of any child are the adults in their lives who love them deeply. And, as chaotic as that love can sometimes be shown, those are our children's first teachers, right? And they are our best co-teachers. They are our best curriculum developers. I often think like, what does it mean to answer the question, what does a teacher need to know and be able to do to best teach this group of kids? Who usually answers that question? Curriculum developers, researchers connected like to institutions that are far away from our local schools, right? Our local communities. Who should be answering that? Young people who know each other and are sharing things and realities with each other that maybe they don't even share with their parents, right? And the parents, elders, and community members who get to know those kids when they're at their best and when they're at their most vulnerable. Oftentimes, our multilingual children of color, especially, are not necessarily willing to be at their most vulnerable in a school environment where they interact with you, where they're made to feel like they are in danger and at risk for being themselves, right? And that's an unfortunate reality that sometimes we don't want to admit to, but it is the reality of many of our young people, especially multilingual kids of color. And so collaborating with community members means bringing in more expertise, bringing in like, think of like the dimension of vision that can happen when we combine our lenses, right? The dimension of hearing that can happen when we combine the ways that we listen through our different hearts and our different like lenses of being able to hear even what kids are telling us. Partnering with people who think in different ways, who communicate in different ways. The teaching field kind of funnels a very particular type of person into teaching, right? So it's primarily white, English dominant, and women, but also the type of communication style, right? The type of thinking processing that's privileged and really, really, pipelined into becoming a teacher. Well, what about people whose communication practices are incredibly effective and are done through embodiment, done through the visual arts, done in ways that are really, really take more time, are connected to land rather than connected to paper. These are practices that community members are going to know more and better sometimes than teachers. And this is especially the case when you are a teacher who does not come from the exact community of the kids who you're teaching. And I'm going to take Pang as an example, right? Pang is Hmong, right? And all of her students are Hmong, but being Hmong is a variety of things. And just because one person is Hmong and the students are Hmong doesn't mean everybody has the same experiences, backgrounds, and ways of doing things, or the same varieties of language, right? Or the same ways of making sense of the world. Now you layer that with saying like the primary, racial identity of most of our teachers are white. And even our heritage teachers, we have many, many more multilingual teachers of color who are heritage teachers, but many of our heritage teachers who are, for instance, in Spanish contexts, they don't necessarily have the same immigration histories as the kids that they're teaching, right? They don't have the same, they don't use necessarily the same language, the privileged language practices that some of their students use, right? All of these things are reasons why we create richer and better healing environments when we partner with these co-teachers who are not necessarily official teachers, but really know how to do teaching and learning in really powerful ways.
Thank you, Jenna. I can't bring that student back. He's gone. And through my time with Project Chandu, I've learned that I shouldn't use so-and-so committed suicide because it's not he didn't commit a crime, but so-and-so took their life. Another way to say it so it's much more sensitive. So what happened that summer really shifted my teaching practice, turned it all the way around. I started doing a lot more mini lessons that were on self-care, self-love, self-esteem, mindset, perseverance, seeing yourself as an asset versus a deficit. And so I also had the opportunity to start to continue Hmong 1, 2, and then to have Hmong 3. And in Hmong 3, we do youth-led anticipatory action research. And that is the class where students thrive. We talk about some of the hardest topic, digging deep into why they are the way they are. And so I really have come a long ways in shifting my own teaching practices. But I also have connected home partnerships. So whenever I have a student who is suicidal, I work alongside with our counselors, with our social worker, with our therapist. And I call home. And if they're not at the suicidal stage, if they're depressed, they have anxiety, I still call home. I make the time. I spend about 2 to 3 hours with this process. I call home, and the first thing I'll do is introduce myself and say, hey, you know what? This is what I've observed about your child. Tell me more. Some parents will be very honest. Some will be semi-honest. I've already heard the student's side of the story. I want to hear the parent's side of the story. And then I will take some time to talk about mental health and the importance of mental health on our students and my experiences that I see in the classroom with mental health. And then I will ask the parents for their hand in coming up with a plan of action. Is this something that you can work with me, the counselor, and the social worker, the psychologist? Is this something you can help be a partner in? And majority of the time, 95% of the time, things go well. We get students the help that they need. And things turn for the better. There are sometimes parents don't want that collaboration and it gets tricky, but we find a way around it. And so it's really changed the way I do things in the classroom. And so this last segment, Jenna and I will popcorn and we will take turn sharing with you what are some things that you can do to create a safety, secure a safety net with your students. And through my work with Project Shendu, I found that students who had a safety net when they were depressed or suicidal, they were more likely to eventually get out of that stage and be successful. And the students who were not successful, didn't have that safety net, and so they fell through the crack and took their own lives. So what can you do? Um, the first and most important thing is take time to build that trust with your students. Listen to them, get to know them, what's below that iceberg. Okay, that's so important. If they don't trust you, they won't share much with you. But once they start trusting you, they will start being much more vulnerable. And then you can kind of figure out what is it? Why is it that they're skipping class all the time? Or why is it that they're not turning in their homework? You're going to be able to troubleshoot some of that. And eventually, if there is a mental health concern, then you work along with your school support staff to build that safety net. Get some training with mental health. Get QPR training, question, persuade, respond, so that so that you know what to do if a student says, you know what, I'm depressed, I'm suicidal, and work with your school staff, because it should be a teamwork to build that safety network for that student during that time period and moving forward. Work with your parents through either you, if you don't have the capacity, or through your bilingual staff. Talk to them. And I often tell parents, this is my experience, and here's what worst case scenario could look like. I need you to do what you need to do at home, and thank you for everything that you've done at home. And so really getting the parents to have that partnership is also so crucial. And then I'll turn it over to Jenna.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I want us to think. I mean, I think the last thing I want to talk about is all of these examples that Peng has given us just now. These really concrete action steps. These are connected to something that Dr. Sonia Nieto and Dr. Jeff Duncan Andrade and Jeff Duncan Andrade. He has a TEDx talk called "Roses and Concrete," and he's written about that too. But he talks about critical care, and it actually comes from Dr. Sonia Nieto's work. And critical care, the way he talks about it is to say, we care for our students. And, Dr. Ofelia Garcia, who is kind of this grandmother of translanguaging and bilingual education, she's talked about the difference between caring about our kids and caring for our kids, right? And she says, lots of teachers care about our kids. Man, I hope they're doing okay. I want to make sure you succeed, right? Caring for kids is a very different thing. Caring for our children can be tough on us, right? Especially if it means that we're tapping into that emotional labor that we may or may not be equipped to provide. And so caring for kids, caring for our children, especially when it comes to mental, emotional, and spiritual health and wellness and well-being, we need other people to do that with us, right? So caring for young people requires us to work together with other people who also care for them. And I'm going to come back to Bang's point about connecting with families, about that point in just a minute, actually. And Jeff Duncan Andrade talks about that question of caring for kids, and he talks about something really important. He says, there is different ways that we care for kids, and it's connected to trying to bring hope into the lives of young people. And when adults, especially teachers, care about their kids, they often bring a kind of hope that he calls hokey hope. It's going to be better. It'll all be, it's not too bad. Just try to look on the bright side, and I think this also gets to the type of people who tend to become teachers and are pipelined into teaching, and also it gets to that emotional labor of being a teacher, right? There's secondary traumas that we carry when we really do connect with our young people and care for them in ways that are really steeped in vulnerability. And sometimes it's too much, and we respond in ways that are our own protective mechanisms of saying, like, it's going to be okay. I know it's rough, but it'll get better, right? And he says, you got to think about things beyond hokey hope. You have to think about it in terms of critical hope. Critical care for young people requires critical hope. And critical hope, the difference there is that you recognize the truth in what they are telling you about the circumstances that are unlivable. You recognize the reality that they are sharing or maybe not sharing with you about the untenable ways that the world around them is demanding that they live in that world, right? The unfair ways, the unsurvivable ways, the ways it's telling them, look, just tread water for a little bit longer. I know a lot of people, a lot of teachers became aware of some of Dr. Bettina Love's work this summer, especially with the Abolitionist Teaching Network. She has an amazing book called We Want to Do More Than Survive. This idea of survivance, right, is that you are treading water, and sure, you can survive treading water, but for how long? Survival should be acute. Again, just like stress should be acute, it should be discrete, right? Survival is something you, like, there's a thing that happens and you survive it. If you are required to constantly be treading water so you don't drown, that's what's called survivance. Surviving despite unsurvivable circumstances for the long haul. And that is not something that creates a situation where our spirits, our emotional well-being, it can actually survive. And that can create really this kind of emotional death or this spiritual disconnection, right? And so critical hope recognizes, oh, you're being asked to tread water and that water keeps rising, or you don't see land on the horizon, or boats keep passing you by and being like, you're doing great, but not giving you a hand, right? Critical hope, critical care, critical love for our children who are in our classes, that really is a question of what I've been talking to a lot of teachers and administrators about this last year in terms of an idea called radical listening. When we listen to young people, and Pang just talked about this, when we listen to the things that young people are telling us or almost telling us or not telling us, and we hear the kernel of the realities that they're sharing with us or attempting to share with us. And sometimes young people are also very good at being like, it's not that big of a deal. Especially young people who have already survived within toxic stress and intergenerational or toxic racialized trauma for a long time, really good. Or toxic gender-based trauma, really good at being like, it'll be fine, it's not a big deal. When in reality, it's unsurvivable, and somehow they are like powering through, right? So radical listening says, I'm going to hear what you're telling me. I'm going to hear the truth in what you're telling me, including the fact that, yes, you have been surviving this, right? And I'm going to respond to the core of what you are telling me, the core truth of what you're telling me, even if it's something I don't want to face, even if it's something that's not part of my reality, even if it's something that I wish were not true, right? This is something I'm going to respond to in a way that you feel heard and responded to. You feel uplifted, you feel held and loved and healed, right? So radical listening is a collective action, and it's something that we can do with our kids. It's something we can do in our classrooms. What if we treated mental health and wellness as a pedagogy of language education, right? There are major pedagogies, communicative practices that really, really are steeped in collective response to trauma, to intergenerational harms, and to collective healing, right? And there's a lot of language that happens, a lot of communication practices, a lot of communication strategies. These are definitely things that we can create a claim for in our language environments. And so that radical listening in order to provide critical care for kids, for young people, where they are able to then claim critical hope that actually things are going to be a little bit better, or this is something I can live with in my life. And this is tough too, because sometimes we really, as adults, especially if we ourselves are not living with depression or other things that are labeled as mental health concerns, if we ourselves are not living with those, they're treated as though they are something that needs to be gotten over or treated so that they can be gotten rid of, right? But in reality, like many people live with things that are labeled as mental health issues, and it makes them who they are. And when we tell our kids that you would be better off if you weren't the way you were, that just does a lot more harm. It does a lot more damage. And so instead saying, like, what does it mean to destigmatize the fact that there's a large spectrum of how we can live with each other, and that I can actually be loved even if I'm coping with depression, with anxiety, with the impacts of racialized trauma, with the realities of living in an environment where physical violence from policing is something that I've had to survive, where the reality of family separation at the hands of the government, right, is something that my friends have to survive, and or my cousins have to survive, or I have to survive, right? Living with the realities of things that are labeled as mental health issues is something that we need to bring into the center of our relationships with young people, because there's nothing broken and there's nothing wrong and there's nothing damaged about a young person who is living with who they are in the world, right? Who is living with the world as it is for right now and as it has made their life to be. And there is great healing power in being able to collectively envision what does it mean to be healthy together as different people who have come through a world that we want to then create in an image that feels like thriving, right? Feels like thriving, that is open and available to all of us, regardless of how well we fit into a very narrow description of normal, right? This kind of work, this kind of teaching, it saves lives. It absolutely saves young people's lives. And this is the last point I want to touch on, which, families and parents are absolutely most often our best partners, as Pang shared, right? And also some of our students, some of our young people, they are terrified of being who they are with their families, as they figure out who they are in the world. This is especially the case for LGBTQI plus youth who are figuring out their gender identities, forms of expressions, and presentations, and it is not always the safest thing to contact families about concerns about a young person in your class, especially if there's LGBTQIA identity processes happening within that young person. Always talk to your kids first. Who do you want me to talk to? And don't do it when you're terrified for them and concerned for them, right? At the beginning of the class, right? How do we first grow relationships with each other that aren't about academic achievement, that aren't about language development, or aren't about how do we do tasks together? What if we find out, like, if there's something really great happening, who do you want me to tell? Who do you want me to contact? It doesn't even have to be a blood relative, right? Who do you want me to contact? If there's something that I'm concerned about that's about your academics, who do you want me to reach out to? And if there's something going on with you that I'm concerned about, who is it okay for me to talk to? That's really important, because they might, if you ask like, who do you want me to? They might be like, I don't want you to talk to anybody. But if you say, who is it okay for me to? They might tell you somebody. It may not be an adult. It may not be who you expect. But really what's important is that we create nests of safety and recognition around young people who are really, really often maybe struggling to survive in this point in their life. Okay, so there's some resources that's on that last slide. That it's like a teal slide in the slideshow. There's some links to some really amazing community created, sometimes youth created resources by different collectives that take a really, I think a really important view on mental health and wellness that really destigmatizes and decenters. Sometimes people talk about decentering, like normalization of quote sanity, right? So decentering this very small definition of what does it mean to be mentally healthy, right? Or normal in terms of mental and emotional health. And so it's created by and for, all these resources are created by and for people who themselves live with a variety of mental health realities. Many of these, all the ones that I listed here, I think have resources that are in English and in Spanish and some in French as well. So these are things you can also use with young people. Yes, and that's what I wanted to share. So yeah, so our contact stuff is on this last page. Pang, do you want to say any last words?
Yeah, I just want to say that, in order to do this to work well, you have to start destigmatizing mental health in your classroom. You have to start talking about it from the first day. September is Suicide Prevention Month. Why not? And throughout every single week, I touch base on mental health, especially when there's a lot of trauma going on in our community. And then May is Mental Health Awareness Month. So if you do this religiously in your classroom consistently, your students are going to know. And I will say that because I've told my students, if you hear your friends not doing well, you need to speak up. And we've had a couple of cases where the students didn't tell me, but they told their friend, and their friend told me. And so we were able to get help for them. So we've seen lots of students recover through this difficult time period. And this is what we need to do in order to make sure that we do prevention work versus reactive work. Because at the end of the day, when you lose that kid to suicide, can't bring them back. So I'll turn it over to Meredith. It is 7 o'clock. I am just being observant of time.
And I appreciate that. I tend to go like, oh no, it's the after party. We're 20 minutes late. So I need somebody to watch the time. First of all, you guys are an incredible team. Like I'd be here all night. Like the information, the applicability, the like, I can't even think of words. The practicality seems like, just everything is so powerful. And I'm like jotting notes, like, I had to grab a new pen because the other pen I didn't realize was dried out. Because I was just sitting like with my mouth open in the recording. Thank you. Like, just a treasure trove of things to think about. Nina, who is my colleague, who is incredible and is our heritage Spanish teacher at our school, is on the call. And I'm like sitting here, like jotting down notes for things for her and me to talk about later, because you hit several points that are conversation points that we hit often with the privilege in different heritage programs. For example, like you said, the different immigrant experiences, my mind was like, oh my God, we've talked about this. And, it's just incredibly helpful. We also work in a school that's about 35% Asian, typically Korean. Typically our students are Korean American, first generation usually. And it's been really, I guess more somber than usual these past few weeks, of course, but a lot of these conversations are ones that we've been having for years in our school, because our school's demographics have changed so quickly. And so especially in this last year of virtual teaching, going, okay, well, I haven't heard from this student, maybe their internet is bad, but then this other student, we've had this conversation in our faculty, so I don't think anybody would mind me sharing it. Are we doing that to our Black and brown students, but are we assuming that our white and Asian students are just like, oh, they're probably behind, you know, they'll catch up, like I'll email. Are we ignoring, Pang, like you said, ignoring some of the quieter struggles because we just take it as, I don't know what the word, like compliance, or it's just like, oh, well, he's kind of quiet, you know, or whatever, and really not addressing it the way we would address it if it were louder or defiant, or, you know, like just manifested itself in a different way, that as teachers we go, oh, something's going on. I mean, you've just given me so much to think about. And the fact that, Jenny, you mentioning that, like breaking it down to the three, like the three different ways to ask, you know, who is it okay that I contact, is, I don't know why, but it's really like emotional for me, because that's what a powerful reflection in our own lives. Who do we, you know, who do we want told that, who do we want to be praised to? Who do we want to check in on us? Who do we want to, you know, when people have concerns, who do we want them to talk to? What an incredible, I'm doing that immediately, like immediately. So like, I've got notes to myself just to add things. So I can't thank you enough. I'm also reflecting on some of the harmful optimism pieces. And I'm going to think a lot about that in the coming days too, because we've talked about a lot on our course team, again, like Nina and some others, you know, are we too afraid to acknowledge these days, especially how hard this all is? I feel like sometimes we think we're walking on eggshells and we're afraid that everyone's sort of like too fragile. So we can't say that this is really hard. We're just kind of like, it's okay, guys. Nelson, you're doing great. Nelson's got like a 3 in the class, you know, and he's saying like, I'm really finding it hard to do deadlines. I can't do my work. I'm finding it hard to focus. Like, and we're going, you're going to be fine. Just let me know what you need. Like that, hi, tiny person, you know, hello. All of those kind of things, like, is that I'm 100% being, like harmfully optimistic in some ways, because like I'm myself, like, I feel like, what can we, you know, acknowledge, or that kind of thing. Or I think as we look ahead to the school year, right, we go, oh, I hope next year's better. What is next year going to look like? And all of that unknown, we want to tell ourselves like, it'll be okay. I'm sure it'll be fine. Things will be a little bit better. And then we keep like saying that. And if they're not, or whatever, it's just a lot. It's just a lot to think about. So I really, really appreciate like just all the resources and your time, of course, and just everything. I think these are really critical points to bring up, and man, we need more conversations like that. You guys are incredible. Thank you so much. I can't thank you enough. I didn't see any questions either in the chat. Yeah, just compliment, praise all around. Truly, thank you. I'm going to reshare the slides really quickly and make it not go to Joe. It was just going to go to you there. Private message. There we go. Boop. I'm going to repaste that. Thank you guys so much. So Jenna, Pang, if you want to join us at some other point, all of the resources, because again, with all that free time, you guys aren't busy at all. The rest of the series is on